Welcome to this week's edition of Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. Happy Easter to you. We're joined this week by two members of the Transportation Committee. Lots going on in Connecticut versus in terms of transportation. Let me introduce our guest to you. State Representative Fred Wilms is a Republican in the 142nd District, which includes Norwalk and New Canaan. And State Representative Kristen McCarthy-Vahey is a Democrat with the 133rd District, which is Fairfield. Thank you for coming by.
Good morning.
Thank you. Weekend in particular. Appreciate it. So let's go, Connecticut. Which is the catchphrase for the governor's 30-year, $100 billion plan. We've heard about it for more than a year now. We've been talking about it. It's been bandied about in the legislature. So where does that stand?
Well, Tom, it's a work in progress. It seems like a lot of things have been put on hold pending approval of the transportation lockbox. It seems like that's been put to the forefront.
This is a piece of that. The governor's way of saying, if you vote this in, we will protect the money. It won't go elsewhere, as we see often with the transportation funds.
Yes.
It's going to be only for transportation.
Yeah, I think there's pretty wide agreement that the projects that the governor lists in his plan have a lot of support, or there could be a lot of support, or certainly a need for them. So the question then becomes, well, how do we pay for it? And there is a special transportation fund, and monies do go in there, but unfortunately those monies have been diverted away to pay for the operating deficits in our budget. So the focus now is, well, let's create a lockbox so the money that goes in there stays there, actually is used for transportation, and the feeling is that needs to be done first, and then we can move forward on some of these other projects. And last December we had a vote on the lockbox in the special session. I voted for it. I support the concept. I've been working to make the lockbox as strong as possible so that future legislatures can't divert money away from it. And I expect that we'll be having a vote on it again in the next few weeks. I don't know where the final language is going to come out, but I'm certainly for as strong of a lockbox as possible.
It passed the Senate last year, but not the House. And this isn't actually a done deal, even if it does pass in the legislature.
That's right, and I think Fred's right. The conversation has been focused quite heavily on the lockbox and on the funds, but the plans are actually moving forward in terms of what's happening with Let's Go Connecticut. So some of the programs that have already been approved, things like the bike and pedestrian programs, which is one that is such a small portion of it, but there are grants that are going out to funds. There are projects that we're looking at with the highways, 84 up in Hartford, which is a big congestion point for our state and for folks moving through our state. There have been a lot of plans that have continued to move forward. So some of the conversation, certainly a lot of the conversation has been about the lockbox, but we are moving forward already with looking at multimodal means of transportation, looking at how we deal with the congestion, looking at how we provide a walkable, bikeable, more accessible community for our millennials who we want to attract to Connecticut, for our seniors who we hope can stay when they're not able to drive, and to create transit-oriented development opportunities along our corridor, certainly here in Fairfield County, that will continue to enhance the opportunities for folks. So there are multiple pieces of the conversation happening simultaneously.
Just going back to the lockbox for a moment, though, if you pass it, it will be something that the voters of the state of Connecticut will have to vote on, will have to approve. Do you have a sense from your constituents that this is something they're in favor of? There are those, some Republicans in particular, who are saying this sounds like a ruse, just a way of raising taxes.
I would say in Norwalk and New Canaan, the areas that I represent, the lockbox it's looked upon favorably. Transportation is certainly a major issue down here in Lower Fairfield County, and if I'm correct, a lot of the legislators from Fairfield County did vote for the lockbox last December. So I think there is broad-based support because people here recognize how important transportation is. I mean, we're connected with Metro North to New York City. We're part of the New York City economic zone. And so we have special ties there with Metro North and with the expressways and other means of transportation that Kristen pointed out that maybe some other areas of the state don't. So I think we definitely have a special focus here.
Do you have a sense that your constituents even know what's going on with the lockbox, what the heck it is?
Tom, it's interesting that you say that because I haven't heard a lot from people about about that particular issue, but what I do hear about are the issues commuters face. And so I think people do want us to make sure that we are using the funds for transportation, whether or not they understand the specific mechanics of the lockbox or some of the nuances of the conversations that we're having in Hartford. But I think people are generally supportive of, if we have designated funds for transportation, that they want those funds to be used for transportation. That said, we're certainly facing so many challenges with the budget today. And often what happens when you hear from constituents is they're expressing concerns or interest in the specific issue that they're facing at that point in time. I think when we look at the transportation funding, and I also have voted for the lockbox, and again, most recently in the Transportation Committee vote, and believe that we really need to make sure that we secure those funds and use them appropriately, because transportation really is one of the pillars of economic development. It will be something that will help us to improve our economy, to increase our economic competitiveness. And when we talk about economic competitiveness, it's not just about businesses, it's also about people, their way of life.
I have to talk about economic competitiveness. Hours. We have to get some commercials on the air. When we come back, we're going to talk about a controversial aspect of this governor's plan, and that's the widening of I-95. Talk about it right after this. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. Talking with two members of the Transportation Committee. For 25 plus years, we've been doing this program and talking about the problems on I-95. And every time a proposal like widening I-95 or double-decking I-95 has come up, the experts have looked at me and said, this ain't going to happen. It's just, it's not possible, it's too expensive, and it won't do what it's expected to do. And now, part of the governor's plan, everyone's talking about widening it. What's this about?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. That's exactly what I asked when I heard about it too, because generally speaking, when you look at widening, if you build it, they will come and the congestion will just increase. I'm not a big fan of the widening, but what it's about, it's been explained to me, is we have a lot of through traffic that comes from New York and is headed up to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and that the widening addresses that opportunity to do congestion mitigation and congestion pricing, especially for the through traffic, the folks who won't take the train, who won't use the bus.
We should just explain, that means they're going to pay. They're going to pay tolls, they're going to pay more. Whether it's a high-speed lane or a congested lane during the rush hour, it isn't going to be the same for everybody.
Right. And I'm not saying that I agree with that necessarily, but that's what, as it's been explained to me. But I think there are a lot of inherent problems with looking at widening 95, particularly in our area. It's certainly a different conversation for the folks who are up, my friends up near Old Lyme or Branford, those folks up that way. It's a different
east of New Haven.
That's right. But for us, I think it poses a lot of challenges, a lot of problems.
And you mentioned if they build it, they will come. There's actually a term for that, induced traffic. And studies have shown that when you add a lane, more cars and more trucks appear.
We almost wonder maybe we should take away a couple lanes from a 95 and then we'll see what happens. But
bite your tongue.
Right, absolutely. Well, certainly the double-decker idea, that's very fanciful, and I don't think that's going anywhere. As far as widening I-95, in terms of my constituents, I haven't really heard a lot of people in favor of that. And there's a couple things, though, that I would look at. Well, one is what we've already been doing are the interchange lanes, like we did here in Norwalk on exit 14 and 15, and then in Darien, exits 11 and 10, where the entrance and the exit ramps have been expanded. Essentially, extra lanes been added there. The bridges were widened. That's really reduced congestion. certainly in the morning going down towards Stanford from here. So I support that concept all along I-95. I think that really works. The other thing that I would look at, and Kristen talked about this, is congestion pricing, where if we put in an extra lane, or that can switch back and forth in mornings and afternoons, and then you would charge for it. And so basically there are people who are, you know what, I have more money, I don't have a lot of time. And then there's other people who say, I got a lot of time, but I don't have a lot of money. So if you don't have much time, but you have some extra money, you'll pay the toll essentially for that. And if you don't, you take the regular lanes. And studies have shown, the federal government's a big supporter of this, that it helps reduce congestion. And certainly that's the major problem we face.
These are passive tolls. You don't stop and drop coins.
No.
Or dollar bills or whatever it would be. It's going to be electronic.
It'll be an easy pass, or like on the Hudson Parkway, they take a picture. And again, this would be totally voluntary. And it would be used not to raise revenue, but it would be used to reduce congestion.
There is also talk of Rhode Island is looking at charging just the trucks that use the state's roads. Would you be in favor of that?
Well, I mean, the truck traffic is certainly something that we need to look at, but we really haven't had a full conversation in our transportation committee about all the aspects of the tolling. I think that you have to look at it from a broad perspective, and it's certainly, we have a lot of single occupancy vehicles that are on the road, and when you look at tolling, for me, you look at it in the context of the broader multimodal transportation system. And what are we doing to make sure we're improving our bus and transit options? What are we doing to maybe looking at double-decker train cars instead of a double-decker highway? Improving our rail capacity, which is certainly something that there's interest in doing. It's part of the plan, is actually making use of all 4 of the tracks and having more of a subway type service and an express type service. So I think you have to look at it in the broader context.
I'm going to take another break. When we come back, talk about congestion. Let's talk about congestion at the DMV right after. Welcome back to Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. Let me reintroduce our guests to you, both members of the Transportation Committee and both state representatives. Kristen McCarthy-Vahey is with the 133rd District, Fairfield, and Fred Wilms, Republican, with the 142nd District, Norwalk, New Canaan. The DMV. Just have to say that wherever you are, and people roll their eyes because they've all had unpleasant experiences. It's been particularly unpleasant in the last year because of the new computer system. We now have someone who's gone through the process and gotten the okay to be the new head of the DMV. Are you hopeful that they're going to be able to do something to clean things up there?
What a mess. In my district, we have the DMV in Norwalk, and it's in my district. The Republicans, we've proposed, and I think that, it has some bipartisan support. We've proposed outsourcing more of the functions at DMV, like to AAA, where they can.
As has the governor, as a matter.
Well, and then that's great. I support that, and so I think we really need to look at that. And AAA certainly provides really good customer service, and that's really what the focus needs to be. Is when people interact with the state, one of the few ways where they interact with the state directly is through the DMV, and they're just getting lousy customer service. And in the private sector, if you provide lousy customer service, you go out of business. And so we definitely need to do things differently. I support the outsourcing. Also, I know the DMV is working to do more things online. I've heard from my constituents that those experiences have been good, and I think we need to work to expand it. One of the things that people really shake their head on is, and I discovered this last year, was that the computer switchover at DMV, they were moving away from COBOL, which, and I'm dating myself now, but when I was in college 30, 35 years ago, that's what we learned, COBOL. And this is the system they're still using. So, they really have a deep hole that they've dug themselves into. And, there's a couple of ways that I talked about where I think we can improve the experience.
Have they been able to convince you that they're going to get better?
Well, when the interim commissioner came in for our appropriations subcommittee hearing, there was a lot of very interesting data, and one of them was how much more people can do online. And I talked with him at the time about that, getting the word out to consumers, go online, check out the website. You don't have to stand in line as much as you think. And that's something I think as legislators we need to partner with, because that will help those wait times. It will help with that. Certainly the transition, as Rep. Wilms talked about with the computer system, has been, to say bumpy is an understatement. But I am confident that that department can get back on track. However, we've got some real budget challenges ahead. And when you look at customer service and personnel and shrinking budget dollars, that becomes a concern for an agency like the DMV. And so I think, as legislators, as we ask them to continue to improve their systems, we're going to need to provide the types of options and partnerships that will allow the customers to be served, but recognizing the budget situation we have.
I mentioned the governor before. He also wants people who are delinquent in their right now, that you can't register your vehicle or re-register it if you owe taxes. It's the DMV that catches you and says you pay up or you don't get the document. And he wants people to go ahead and be able to renew. And local communities are very upset about this because that's a source of revenue for them.
I strongly oppose that proposal, and admittedly I'm wearing my former government hat here. I chaired the Board of Estimate Taxation for the City of Norwalk for 8 years, from 2005 to 13. And the car tax is an important revenue source for a lot of towns and cities, and this is a way where that tax can be collected as an enforcement mechanism. With the car tax, you're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and for the tax collector to stay on top of that is very challenging.
But the governor says this will reduce the congestion at the DMV. You won't get hung up on this problem.
Well, at this point, there's bipartisan support for what Fred is saying. That language has really been removed. I don't know if that will come back in conversation as the process moves forward. But we heard very clearly from the cities and towns, again, as a former selectman myself, same thing. We need our towns, especially today, especially with the state budget facing what it is, more pressure is going to be put on the towns and cities, and we need them to be able to collect all the tax dollars that are owed to them.
Yeah. I'm going to take one more break. When we come back, talk about it may not be an issue that affects a lot of us, but it was a hot issue at the legislature, and that's whether Tesla should be able to sell its vehicles in Connecticut. We'll talk about that right after this. Taxi companies, but anybody can put a little. Just a few minutes left with our guests. So why is this issue of Tesla opening, I think, 3 dealerships in Connecticut such a big, and they're really not the same as the dealerships we all know and love or hate. These would just be showrooms for Tesla, and I think you just look online and go through a book and you pick out your car and then you've got one. You don't have to deal with the salespeople the same way. So why did this become such a hot issue?
Well, for a few reasons. I think the dealerships, we have a model of sales in Connecticut, and the dealerships have expressed concern about the direct sale model. Will consumers be protected? Though we've heard lots of testimony from folks who have worked with Tesla and who liken it to going to the Apple store and buying your computer directly and have had great customer service. But there's an issue from the dealership perspective of equality in terms of how the sales go. From a Tesla perspective, they are not selling nearly the volume of vehicles, and they want that option to be able to sell directly to the consumers.
So what's the difference between a Tesla showroom and a a Chrysler showroom?
Well, different technology. You have an internal combustion engine versus an electric-powered vehicle. And so Tesla believes that based on their business model and their technology model, they need to sell directly. They need to have control over the entire process. And they don't believe that if their cars are being handled by internal combustion engine dealers, that they're going to get the kind of treatment that they should. And I completely agree. Last year I voted for the Tesla bill. This year Senator Duff has proposed a more expanded version for all electric car manufacturers, and I'm a strong supporter of that. I really believe that our laws, the franchise laws were written, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 years ago when a lot of the dealers were being bullied by their own manufacturers. So if you were a Buick dealer, you were most concerned about General Motors. And I get that, but it's now 2016, and our laws need to keep up with the new technology. I really believe electric cars are the wave of the future, and I really believe that our laws need to reflect that, and we need to be on the forefront.
Seatbelts in school buses. Many people wonder how come we've reached this point and we still don't have them. Is this something you're both for?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. We were discussing this prior to the show. We had a vote in committee. I did vote to support that to move forward in the committee process, but I have grave reservations with respect to the funding. And also, I like to use data to make decisions. And here in Connecticut, in fact, we don't require seatbelts in the back seat for those who, I believe it's 16 and older. And when you look at accident data and traffic data, that might be a more important issue for us to focus on as opposed to seatbelts. Of course, I want our students to be safe, but for example, if you require a seatbelt in a school bus and you have a 35-pound second grader or a 50-pound second grader, and then you have a 120-pound high school student, that seatbelt isn't going to fit the same way. So there are a host of issues, but the funding piece of it is a big concern, again, for our municipalities.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of safety for our kids, but the bill that's going through now really, I think, needs further study and further work. Kristen, I think, brought up a lot of really good issues in addition to the funding issue and a mandate on the towns and cities. Towns and cities can do it if they want already, but they're choosing not to for the most part. There's other liability issues. What happens if you're a bus driver and you've got kindergartners in the bus and some of them don't want to put the seatbelt on? What do? Do you just sit there, or do you have to force the seatbelt on the kids? So you have, I'm willing to look at this further, but there's a lot of liability, funding, safety issues. A one-size-fits-all solution doesn't work here.
And this hasn't been worked out in other states? Can we just adopt what they're doing?
I'm not familiar with what other states have done. I believe there are some states that have moved forward, but I don't have a lot of background on what other states are doing. Just have heard some of the data about fatalities, and one death is too many.
This is fascinating, though. This shows people how complex issues can be. It just seems like a no-brainer. Put them in already. No, there's a lot to it. I thank you for making us aware of that and so much behind all of these issues. Appreciate your coming by. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for joining us as well. Stay tuned. News continues.